There is a photograph I keep coming back to, and it is not a heroic one. A tank, an enormous one, sat at a drunken angle in a sea of churned brown mud somewhere on the Eastern Front, and it is going nowhere ever again. The hatches are hanging open. The crew are long gone. They climbed out and they walked away on foot into the cold and they left it. Now here's the thing I want you to notice. Nobody shot this tank. There is no neat hole punched through the front. No brave gunner knocked it out at range in a duel of steel. It simply stopped. Something deep in its guts, something a tired crew out there in the freezing muck with the tools they had on them could not put right. Something in there gave up. And so they did the only thing left to do. They abandoned it. They walked away from one of the most feared war machines ever built and left it to sink into the mud and rust. And I want you to hold that picture because that tank has a name, and the name alone was enough to make hardened men go quiet. This is the Tiger, the great beast of the German army, the tank that 80 years of films and books and pub arguments have told you was the finest tank of the war, the unstoppable one, the perfect one. And it is sitting in a field, defeated, because it broke down and couldn't be dragged home. That right there is the whole story I want to tell you, because the Tiger is the most overrated war machine of the entire Second World War, and yet, and this is the part that matters, it was also genuinely magnificent. Both of those things are true at once. Let me show you how. Let me get the muck off my hands and say hello. The name's Reg. I spent the better part of a working lifetime as the fellow they brought the broken machines to, a fitter, a mechanic, a restorer of old military vehicles, the bloke with his head down in the engine bay, while everybody else stood about admiring the paintwork. And I'll tell you the honest truth about how I come to this one. When I was a young lad, still learning which end of a spanner to hold, I worshipped the Tiger. Absolutely worshipped it. It was on my bedroom wall. That squat, brutal, wide-shouldered shape, that great long gun, all that armor, to a boy it looked like the last word in tanks, like something the other side simply had no answer to. And then I grew up, and I spent 40 years with grease under my nails actually keeping machines alive. And slowly, reluctantly, I fell out of love with it. Not because the Tiger was bad. It wasn't. But because I finally understood what a war machine is actually for, and I finally understood what it costs to keep one running. So this is a hard one for me because I'm going to take apart a legend I used to love. But I'm going to be fair to her while I do it. Come on. Let's have a proper look at this old girl, faults and glory and all. And we start with the glory, because if I skipped it I'd be lying to you, and the whole reason I do this is that I can't stand the lying that goes on about these machines in both directions. So let me say it plainly up front, with no hedging. The Tiger, when it worked, was a terrifying, superb piece of engineering, and the fear of it was completely earned. Start with the gun. The Tiger carried a version of the famous German 88, an 88mm gun that had grown out of anti-aircraft work and turned out to be one of the great armor-defeating weapons of the age. It was accurate. It hit tremendously hard. And crucially, it could reach out and strike an enemy tank at a distance where that enemy could do nothing back. Could put a round straight through the front of most Allied tanks long before those tanks could close to a range where their own guns had a hope. And it wasn't just the gun. It was everything around the gun. The German optics, the gun sights, were beautiful bits of glasswork, genuinely some of the best in the world. And a Tiger gunner could see clearly and lay that big gun precisely at ranges that would have been guesswork for many of his enemies. The whole fighting compartment was built by people who knew exactly what they were doing, When I say the Germans were superb engineers, this is what I mean. The quality of the thing up close is undeniable, and a mechanic can't help but admire the craft in it even while he's cursing the weight. Now pair that gun with the armor. The front of a Tiger was thick, properly thick, flat slabs of good steel, and at any sensible battlefield range the standard Allied tank guns of the early days simply bounced off it. Ping. Nothing. Imagine what that does to a crew to fire and hit, and watch your shot skip off the front of the thing like a stone off a wall, while you absolutely know, that its next shot is going to go clean through you. That is where the fear came from, and it was not propaganda and it was not cowardice. It had a name among Allied tank crews, Tiger Fear, and it was a real, documented thing. Men saw tigers where there were none. A single confirmed tiger in a hedgerow could freeze an entire advance, make experienced crews go cautious and slow and careful, because everyone had heard the stories and nobody wanted to be the one who tested them. So let there be no doubt at all about this. In a straight fight, on ground of its choosing, in the hands of a good crew, the Tiger was a monster, and being on the wrong end of one was a genuinely dreadful place to be. I will not take 1 ounce of that away from her. So how on earth do I stand here and call her overrated? Because, and here's where a mechanic sees a different tank to the one on the bedroom wall, a war is not a single duel on ground of your choosing. A war is 1,000 ordinary days, most of them nowhere near the enemy. And it was on those ordinary days, far from any battle, that the Tiger quietly fell apart. It all comes back to one number: weight. The Tiger weighed, in fighting trim, somewhere around 54 to 57 tons, depending on which version and how you count it. Call it roughly 57 tons of steel. Now, to a boy on his bedroom floor, that sounds magnificent, the heaviest, the toughest, the most. But to a man who has to keep the thing moving, that number is a quiet horror, because everything that went wrong with the Tiger flows out of that weight like water out of a cracked block. Here is the thing they don't teach you when you're young and in love with big tanks. Making a machine heavier doesn't just cost you fuel. It punishes every single part that has to carry, move, stop, or steer that weight. The engine has to shove it. The gearbox has to handle the strain. The brakes have to haul all of it down from speed. The tracks and wheels have to bear it in the mud. And most cruelly of all, there is one component buried deep in the running gear that has to take the full, brutal twisting force of that whole colossal machine and turn it into forward motion. And on the Tiger, that component was a heartbreaker. It's called the final drive. If you're not a mechanic, don't worry about the name, just picture the very last set of gears. Right at the end of the whole chain, that takes the power from the engine and actually turns the drive wheel that pulls the track. On any tracked vehicle, the final drives live a hard life, because everything the engine produces funnels through them at the last moment before it hits the ground. Now take a machine that weighs the better part of 60 tons, and ask those final drives to wrench all of that around, again and again, in mud up banks, slewing the tank left and right to aim, day after day. The Tiger's final drives could not take it. This is not me being unkind. The people who built her knew it, and they were forever tinkering, forever making small changes to the engine and the gearbox and the final drives and the seals, trying to shore up a design that was being asked to carry more than it comfortably could. And here is the cruel geometry of it. When a final drive is overstressed and it fails, it doesn't fail politely by the side of the road near a workshop. It fails wherever the tank happens to be, which on campaign means the middle of nowhere. and it is not a part a crew can swap out in the field with a spanner and a swear word. Getting at a Tiger's final drive was a serious, heavy, specialist job, so a broken final drive very often meant a dead tank right there where it stood. That photograph in the cold open, that, quite possibly, is what you're looking at. Not a battle, a gearbox. And the running gear had a second trap in it, and it's one of the most fascinating own goals in the whole history of tank design, because it came from a genuinely clever idea. Look at a Tiger from the side and you'll see the road wheels. The wheels the track runs around are not in a simple single line. They overlap. They are interleaved, layered over one another, one row tucked partly behind the next like tiles, or like the teeth of two combs pushed together. The Germans had a word for this pattern, and they used it on a lot of their vehicles. And on paper, it was smart. Spreading the wheels out like that spread the enormous weight of the tank more evenly onto the ground, which softened its footprint and helped it ride and gave a more stable gun platform, and even let the tank keep going if one or two wheels were damaged. Clever engineering, honestly. The trouble is, it was clever engineering for a drawing board, and the Tiger did not fight on a drawing board. It fought in Russia. And in Russia, in the autumn, the whole world turns to a thick, deep, clinging mud, and that mud packed up into the gaps between all those beautifully overlapping wheels and jammed itself in there solid. And then this is the part that makes me wince every time. The temperature dropped, and the mud that was packed between the wheels froze. It set like concrete. Overnight, a Tiger could freeze solid to the spot, its lovely interleaved running gear locked into one immovable block of ice and filth, and the crew would be out there in the killing cold trying to chip and burn and lever it free before the enemy arrived. A tank that cannot move at first light because its own wheels have frozen together is not a war winner. It's a very expensive, very vulnerable shed. Then there's the drinking. A machine that heavy, shoved along by a big petrol engine working hard, was monstrously thirsty. The Tiger drank fuel at a rate that would frighten you, and it could only carry so much, so its range, the distance it could go before it needed feeding again, was short. Painfully short. And I need you to understand what that means for the men trying to use it, because it's not just a line on a spec sheet. It means the tank is chained to its fuel supply by a very short rope. It means every mile has to be counted. It means that when Germany's fuel situation grew desperate later in the war, and it grew very desperate, the Tiger became one of the hardest things in the whole army to keep fed. And a tank with no fuel is not a fortress, and it is not a predator. It is a stationary steel box. You start to see the pattern, don't you? This magnificent machine had a habit of ending its days not in a blaze of glory but sat still, out of fuel or frozen up, or with its final drive in pieces, waiting for an end it couldn't run away from. Now, all of that, the breakdowns, the mud, the fuel, all of it might just about be survivable if, when your Tiger conked out, you could simply hitch it up and drag it home to be mended. And here we come to what I think is the single most damning thing about the whole design, and it's the bit the legend never, ever mentions. You could barely recover the thing. Think it through. What do you use to tow a broken 60-ton tank? Well, ideally, another tank. But your ordinary recovery vehicles and lighter tanks simply weren't strong enough to shift a dead Tiger through mud. The load was too great. The unofficial answer out in the field was to use another Tiger or two or even three to haul one broken one, which was so hard on those already fragile final drives that the high command actually forbade it at times, because you'd break the rescuers trying to rescue the casualty. Just sit with the madness of that for a second. Your wonder weapon breaks down so readily and is so hard to recover that the act of towing one wrecks the tank sent to tow it. So more often than the legend will ever admit, a tiger that broke down in a retreat was simply written off, abandoned, blown up by its own crew if there was time, left to the enemy if there wasn't, not killed, just left. And getting them to the fight in the first place was nearly as bad. The tiger was so wide on its proper combat tracks that it wouldn't fit on a railway. It was too broad for the loading gauge, too broad to pass the trackside posts and platforms and tunnels. So to move a tiger any real distance, which meant by rail, the crew had to jack it up and change its tracks, take off the wide combat tracks, pull off the outer row of road wheels, and fit a set of special narrow transport tracks just to make it slim enough to sit on a railway wagon. And then, of course, do the whole heavy, filthy job in reverse at the other end before it could fight. Imagine that. Imagine designing a tank so heavy and so wide that you have to partly dismantle its running gear every time you want to put it on a train. And the bridges. Oh, the bridges. So much of Europe is stitched together by ordinary little bridges built to carry ordinary loads, carts, lorries, normal traffic, with weight limits a fraction of 60 tons. A great many of them simply would not take a tiger. It would drop them, or it wouldn't dare cross. The engineers even built the tank to be sealed up and drive through rivers, underwater, because they knew perfectly well it couldn't trust the bridges. That is a remarkable piece of engineering and at the same time a confession. When your solution to a river is we shall drive the 60-ton tank along the bottom of it, you have built something that does not fit the world it has to fight in. And now we come to the number that, for me, ends the argument. Because you can forgive a machine a lot of temperament if there are enough of them. So how many tigers were there? Across the whole war, from the summer of 1942 to the late summer of 1944, the Germans built roughly 1,350 of this first tiger. Around 1,350. That's the lot. That is the entire production run of the most feared tank of the war. Now hold that up against what it was fighting. The Soviet Union built its T-34, a good, rugged, sloped armour tank designed from the start to be churned out in the tens of thousands. Roughly 50, 60,000 of them, depending how you count the variants. And the Americans built their Sherman, the tank I've gone on about before, in the tens of thousands too, around 49,000. Let that land properly. For every single tiger that rolled out of a German workshop, the Allies and the Soviets between them were turning out tanks by the dozen. The tiger was hand-built, slow, enormously expensive, hungry for skilled labor and scarce materials that Germany simply did not have enough of. Each one was a little masterpiece, and each one took time and treasure that could have built a great many simpler, humbler, more reliable machines instead. You do not win a world war with a handful of masterpieces. You win it with a tide. And the tiger was never, ever going to be a tide. It was a few hundred exquisite exceptions, scattered thin across fronts thousands of miles wide, breaking down as often as they were shot up, and impossible to be everywhere they were needed. And it's worth stopping on why there were so few, because this is where you really see the difference between building a champion and building an army. The tiger was, in the main, put together by the firm of Henschel, and it was not built the way the Allies built theirs, not poured off a production line by the thousand with interchangeable parts and semi-skilled hands. It was closer to hand assembly, slow, careful, skilled work, using a great deal of precious skilled labor and scarce, high-grade materials that a blockaded Germany was desperately short of. One Tiger swallowed far more man-hours to build than a Sherman or a T-34, many times over. Think about what that means as a trade. Every Tiger you build is a decision not to build a whole fistful of simpler tanks instead. The Germans poured their finest engineering and their scarcest resources into a small number of magnificent, complicated machines, while their enemies poured theirs into oceans of good-enough, buildable ones. And here's the quiet cruelty of it. Complexity that dazzles on the test ground becomes a millstone in the field, because every clever, hand-fitted, hard-to-make component is also a clever, hard-to-replace component when it breaks 1,000 miles from the factory. The very thing that made the Tiger so impressive to build was the thing that made it so painful to keep. You cannot mass-produce a masterpiece, and you cannot win a world war without mass production. The Germans, brilliant as they were, backed the wrong idea of what a tank was for. But I can hear it because I've heard it my whole life, usually from a version of the boy I used to be. None of that matters because one Tiger could knock out 5, 10, a dozen enemy tanks before it fell. The kill ratios were lopsided. One Tiger was worth a whole troop of Shermans, and there are famous stories. The most famous of all is an action at a little town in Normandy called Villers-Bocage in the summer of 1944, associated with a German tank commander named Wittmann, where a small number of Tigers tore into a British column and wrecked a startling number of vehicles in a very short time. Now I want to handle this really carefully because accuracy is the whole point of me, and this is exactly the sort of thing that gets twisted. So here's the honest version. Did that action happen? Yes. Was it a genuine, sharp, effective piece of tank fighting? Yes, it was. I'm not going to stand here and pretend Tigers weren't dangerous. I've spent the last 10 minutes telling you how dangerous they were. But the exact tallies, the precise this many tanks in this many minutes by this one man figures that get quoted so lovingly, those are heavily debated by serious historians. Wartime propaganda on the German side had every reason to inflate the score of a hero and a wonder weapon, and it did. Memory is selective. The spectacular day gets told and retold, while the dozen dreary days the same tanks spent broken down in a workshop get quietly forgotten. Numbers grow in the retelling, so treat the famous kill counts as what they are. A real event wrapped in a fog of legend, argued over to this day, and almost certainly bigger in the telling than in the truth. And even if you gave the legend everything it wanted, even if every glorious tally were exactly true, it still wouldn't save the argument. Because here's the trap in the kill ratio story that the boy on the bedroom floor never spots. A kill ratio only counts the tanks that died fighting. It doesn't count the Tigers that died of their own final drives. It doesn't count the ones abandoned in the mud, the ones left behind in a retreat because no one could tow them, the ones that never reached the battle at all because the bridge wouldn't take them or the fuel never came. Those don't show up in a heroic tally, but they show up, every one of them, in the only score that actually decides a war. And that's the turn. That's the thing it took me 40 years and a lot of skinned knuckles to truly believe. The Tiger did not lose because it was outfought. Tank for tank, gun for gun, it usually wasn't. The Tiger lost the war that actually gets fought, the boring one, the one with no film made about it. The war of fuel, and spare parts and bridges and railway wagons and recovery vehicles, and how many working machines you can put in the field this morning and every morning after. It lost the logistics war. And in the end, the logistics war is the only war there is. A tank is not the duel it wins on its best day. A tank is the sum of every day, the days it starts, the days it moves, the days it can be fixed, the days it can be got to where it's needed and got home again when it's hurt. On that measure, the humble, mass-produced, endlessly repairable T-34s and Shermans, the ones the legend sneers at, were doing the actual work of winning, while the Tigers, brilliant and few and fragile, were forever sat in a field waiting for a part that wasn't coming. A broken-down tank kills nobody. A tank that can't cross the river defends nothing. A tank you have to abandon because you can't tow it is a gift to the enemy. The most dangerous tank on the battlefield is worth exactly nothing on all the days it isn't on the battlefield, and the Tiger spent an awful lot of days exactly there. In a workshop, or in the mud, or on a train, or simply out of petrol. So let me be as fair as I know how to be, because I promised her that, and because the lazy version, the Tiger was rubbish, is just as much a lie as the bedroom wall version. In the right circumstances, the Tiger was superb, dug in on the defensive, on firm ground, in the hands of a skilled and experienced crew who knew how to nurse her and place her, and use that tremendous gun and that thick front the way they were meant to be used. She was a nightmare to shift, and she earned every bit of the fear her name carried. Give a good crew a working Tiger and a good position, and the enemy paid dearly. That is real, and I'd never wave it away. The engineers who built her were not fools. They were brilliant men chasing the wrong goal. They built the finest individual tank they could, when what a nation at war actually needed was the finest fightable tank it could build and build and build and keep running. Those are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where the Tiger's whole tragedy lies. She was a masterpiece the war had no room for. Too heavy, too few, too thirsty, too fragile in the running gear, too hard to recover, too grand for the little bridges of the real world. And meanwhile, the plain, cheap, reliable, mass-produced machines she looked down on simply outlasted her, outproduced her, outshowed up her, and won. Reliability beat prestige. Logistics beat glamour. The tide beat the masterpiece. It nearly always does. The engineers, bless them, gave the Germans the most magnificent tank of the war, and in doing it, helped make sure there were never enough of them, running at once in the right places to matter. I got my hands on the running gear of one of these, years back, not a runner, a static machine being preserved, but real steel, real Tiger. And my old workshop partner Stan stood next to me looking at the final drive and the layers of those overlapping wheels. And even Stan, who argues with me about everything and has never once conceded a point in 30 years, went quiet and said, "How did anyone ever keep this thing going?" And that from Stan is practically poetry, because that's the honest reaction of anyone who's actually had to maintain machines. Not isn't it magnificent? It is magnificent. It's good grief. Imagine having to keep it alive, in the cold, in the mud, with the enemy coming and no parts. The awe of a boy and the dread of a mechanic, standing in front of the very same tank. And here's where I turn it round on you, because I didn't drag you through final drives and frozen wheels and railway tracks just to win an argument about a war that ended long before you were born. I think about the Tiger a lot, out in the workshop, and after all these years it's stopped being about tanks. It's about the thing all of us do. We fall for the magnificent thing we can't sustain, over the humble thing we can actually keep going. Every time. We buy the dazzling, complicated, top-of-the-range machine that spends half its life waiting for a specialist, over the plain one that would just start every morning and never let us down. We chase the grand plan, the perfect system, the impressive answer with all the features, the one that looks unbeatable on paper over the simple, modest, boring thing that we could actually maintain and afford and repair and live with for years. We are all in our hearts in love with the tiger, and there's a second trap in it, quieter than the first, and it's about memory. We remember the highlight reel and we forget the breakdowns. We remember our one Villers-Bocage, our best day, our spectacular win, the story we tell at the pub, and we quietly forget the long gray run of ordinary days when the thing was sat in the mud going nowhere. And we judge the whole machine, the whole plan, the whole life by the highlight, when the truth of any of it is in the ordinary days, in whether it showed up, in whether it kept its promise on a cold morning when nobody was watching. So don't be the tiger, or rather, love the tiger, admire it, put it on your wall. I understand, I did. But when it's your life, your work, your plans, the things you actually have to keep running, build the thing that shows up. Build the thing you can fix. Build the tide, not the masterpiece. Because the war, in the end, was not won by the tank that was feared. It was won by the tanks that were there. So that's my question for you, and I do read the comments, so tell me straight. What's the tiger in your life? What's the magnificent, impressive, top-of-the-range thing you fell for, the car, the gadget, the grand plan, that turned out to be more trouble to keep running than it was ever worth? And what's the humble, unglamorous, reliable thing that quietly won in the end? I genuinely want to know. Put it down below. My granddad, who saw a few of these from the wrong end and lived to grumble about it, always said the tank you feared most was never the one that got you. It was the ordinary one, in numbers, that just kept coming. It took me most of my life to understand he was talking about more than tanks. I'm off to help Stan fail to start Bessie again. She's a stubborn old girl too, but at least I can reach her final drive without a crane. And if you enjoyed watching a legend get taken apart honestly and given her due at the same time, then subscribe and stick around, because I've a whole workshop of these to get through: the beautiful failures, the ugly winners, the mad ideas that were secretly genius. The name's Reg. Mind the mud on your way out. And next time somebody tells you the tiger was the best tank of the war, you smile. And you ask them one simple question. Best at what?